Welcome back to the Closers Inner Circle podcast. I am Denise Griffitts, and along with my co-host Ben Gay III, we are continuing our conversation about sales infiltration, what it is, how Ben used it in some extraordinary circumstances, and what it can teach us about selling today. And today we are sponsored by Mitch Weisberg, and I want to thank our sponsor. Mitch helps people and organizations think differently, become more resourceful and more resilient, and find better ways to work together. And honestly, that fits perfectly with what we're talking about and what we do talk about here on the Closers Inner Circle podcast, because sometimes the biggest things that we need to change is the way we're looking at the problem. So take a few minutes to visit mindshiftingwithmitch.org and see what he's up to and tell him we sent you. And before we get started, I would also like to remind you to keep the closers parts 1 and part 2 within reach each week. And the reason is because we're going to be digging into the principles, the stories, and the strategies inside them, and you'll get far more out of the conversation when you can follow along. You can order them at Ronzoni Books, Ronzone Books on eBay, and they're going to arrive with free expedited shipping, and they're signed and dated by Ben. Now, here's what we're talking about today. Ben spent 11 and a half years in and around prisons, including 5 years at San Quentin State Prison and more than 6 years as an inmate at Lompoc Federal Penitentiary. And in both environments, he learned how to understand the system, identify the people who mattered, establish trust, and ultimately make the system work for him. And today we're going to get specific. Ben promised us last week that he would tell us exactly how he used sales infiltration at San Quentin, and then what he learned from doing it again at Lompoc. Good morning, Ben. It's good to hear your voice. I missed chatting with you last week.
Yeah, it seemed weird not
It was.
to
It was.
not to chat with you.
Yeah,
So
my week was completely undone, I have to tell you. So, but we're here. So listen, last week you told us that you would explain exactly how you infiltrated San Quentin. So let's start there. What did you actually do?
well, by the way, this podcast this particular one was instituted by an old friend of mine, Irvin Ray, who's a regular listener, I guess, and from Jacksonville, Florida. And he said to me, text, uh, you talk about sales infiltration all the time, and as a general theory in selling, but do you have specific examples of using it day in and day out, names, dates, and places? And I thought that's very good, because there is a tendency uh, to assume everyone who listens is in selling, and they will just take it and run right out and do it, which is not the case. Sales infiltration, although it's a sales technique, it's not a sales technique. It's not something you turn on and turn off. Oh, I'm in a sales situation now. I will be charming. People buy from people they know, like, trust, and with whom they feel safe. So I'll become that person for the next 30 minutes. And so it's like many people look at it like a light switch. Sales infiltration is a lifestyle that happens to work well in selling. And when you're selling, you may want to be more aware of it uh, consciously than at other times. But that's not the only place you use it, or the only place you should be aware of it. In sales infiltration, by the way, that we're talking about, starts on page 257 of the Closers Part 2. And right in the very first paragraph, I talk about the concept of explaining it is difficult. It's like trying to tell somebody how to ride a bicycle, but you don't have a bicycle for them to ride. You're just talking to them about it. So I want to explain to you places I used it, how I used it, how it worked, and why it worked. But again, it's not just a sales technique, it is a lifestyle. And I've got some notes here that I jotted down this morning of things that popped to my mind talking about it. Example, Gigi and I are having dinner. I guess it was a late lunch, early dinner, whatever, at one of our little Placerville restaurants on Main Street in what we lovingly call downtown, all 4 blocks of it. And we're sitting out on the patio, for lack of a better word. Then there's the glass that goes into the restaurant, and in there we're in the normal seating situations, lots of people. And we're sitting out talking and we're chatting with people coming by and so on. And several people stopped and hugged us, Gigi, me, or both of us. And I wasn't aware of being watched. I'm normally pretty aware of my surroundings and situations, but it must have been watched because after 15, 20 minutes or so, a guy comes out of the inside of the restaurant and he says, I assume to me, because of my ego, are you the mayor of Placerville? And I said, no, I know him, but no. Why do you ask? He said, because you guys seem to know everyone that comes up the street and they all say hello to you and they hug you and so on. I'm just curious what's going on. Well, what was going on? He was watching two things. He was watching Gigi's sweet nature and the fact that she's sort of the queen of Placerville. I'm sure there's other people who think they're the queen, but in her circle, she's the queen of Placerville, as was her mother before her. They were, Gigi still is, but they were and are the sweetest people you'd ever want to know, and they were added to that was the benefit of both being very beautiful. In her day, my mother-in-law, now gone, Lorna Ronzoni, was probably the prettiest woman in Placerville, known for it, and the sweetest woman. And Gigi came up in that, is equally beautiful. It's just the way she was raised. So everybody knows and loves Gigi. If we could allow it, didn't have a business to run, Gigi would be at breakfast, lunch, and dinner 5 or 6 days a week with people who just want to take her out and be with her. Uh, Mostly women, fortunately for me, but a lot of guys too. They just love her. Well, what Gigi is and has been her whole life and didn't know it, although it worked very effectively for her when she was selling real estate, she was a sales infiltrator. She gets inside of an individual or a family or a group or a company or organization, and she's one of them. They love her. Tell you a story, I don't have it in my notes, but just dawned on me, a guy from an old Placerville family. People in New England would find this funny because they have their families go back 300 and 400 years, but on the West Coast, 150 years or so is a long time. This guy comes up to Gigi the other day. She knew him well, went to high school together, and so on. He comes from one of those old families, and he said, old to Placerville, and he says to her, Gigi Ronzoni, Ronzoni being her maiden name, and how a lot of people still know her. How are you? I love you. I think of you 3 or 4 times a day. And when Gigi was telling me the story, I thought 3 or 4 times a day. What's going on here? Well, what was going on was in her sales infiltrator mode about 20, 25 years ago, knowing that he's very shy, uh, withdrawn, doesn't have a lot of friends, not a bad guy, he's just terribly shy, has been his whole life. But 20, 25 years ago at some event or gathering of some sort, she said to him, you have the most beautiful smile, and be sure you show that to people. The advice wasn't the point of it. The point of it was that he had the most beautiful smile, and Gigi told him that he did. Why he thinks of her 3 or 4 times a day, this shy little person, was that he said, every time I go by a mirror, I look at the mirror and I smile to remind myself what you told me 20, 25 years ago. It literally changed my life because now I realize I have an attribute that I should be proud of and that people recognize and so on. And Gigi said, well, you do have, Maddie is his name. He has a full name, but I'm not going to use it. She said, Maddie, you do have a beautiful smile. It's one of the things I've always learned about you. And he said, you've done it again. So I guess now he's going to be looking at himself in the mirror 4 or 5, 8 times a day. That sales infiltration, she didn't have any intent. It's lifestyle. And it's also an example of how little things can literally change somebody else's life. In other podcasts with you, I've talked about a couple of times where I was able to literally save someone's life from a planned suicide, 2 different people, 2 different times, by treating them, not even knowing there was a problem, just treating them well and giving them encouragement and telling them I want to do something with them and so on. And I'm also ashamed to say I've missed a couple where I was with 3 that just popped into my mind. A good friend of ours' father was at our house at a barbecue. Everything was fine. We were all laughing and talking and everything. And he and I weren't close, except sort of a joint fathership of this kid. And 2 or 3 days later, he went out to a park, left a note. I've made many mistakes in my life, but this isn't one of them, and shot himself in the head. My sister-in-law, who'd had some issues over the years, of an earlier wife, by the way, my first wife, her sister, picked up a hibachi barbecue grill, took it in her bedroom, sealed all the windows and doors, and took her life that way. And I had seen her 30 days before. And I knew she had issues, but I wasn't on top of my game, so to speak. And then one other one, I won't go into the details, but 3 separate people, I had an opportunity, had I been more sensitive than I am, to stop what they were about to do, and did with other people. That's sales infiltration as a lifestyle. Gigi didn't know it had a name. I had to think about it and plot and scheme and write to get it down. But I picked it up from another natural sales infiltrator, Jimmy Rucker, my running buddy in high school, my first business partner. And as I've told you many times, Rucker was the greatest salesman I ever personally worked with. And part of it was he was a sales infiltrator, all caps. Naturally, he didn't know what he was doing. I told you this recently in the last week or 2. We go into a meeting, and I have one particular family in mind. They had some younger kids with them, preteen-ish, and we had met them. They were prospects to join the business Jimmy and I were recruiting in. And within minutes, they were calling him Uncle Jimmy. They'd never met him before. They were, their parents, he was their parents' age, and they respectfully, because they were raised properly, were calling me Mr. Gay, which I guess in my earlier years I would have taken as a great compliment. I'm Mr. Gay, he's Jimmy. Well, he was Uncle Jimmy because he infiltrated them almost instantly. He became a part of their family. So I repeat, while sales infiltration can be used very successfully in a sales situation, it will be used very effectively most often if you are a sales infiltrator, if you have become the person they feel they know, like, trust, and feel safe with. And then there are techniques that can aid that. For instance, and if you're taking notes, write this down. One of the most important words in the English language is when it comes to sales infiltration is we, W-E, we. Soon as I meet somebody and find any connecting link, when I talk about us, the situation, it's you and I and we. We break down that I'm me and you're you and you're on one team and I'm on another team. We get into the we very, very quickly. I have a note again that I made in the minutes before we got on today. A great example of that was at Lompoc, which we'll get to in a minute, and to a degree San Quentin, where I was teaching also. But at Lompoc, there were a group of, I taught basic English writing and grammar to a certain degree, although I don't know how to diagram a sentence. But English writing, I got down pretty good. And among my many students there were a significant number of Hell's Angels, the the feared motorcycle gang. Well, I found them to be extremely nice. And if a Hell's Angel gave you his word, you could just take it to the bank, good or bad. you know, he might tell you he's going to kill you and do it, but good or bad, if a Hell's Angel told you something, you could take it to the bank. We were standing in the yard, the parking lot, one day, and I was talking to 6 or 7 of them, and one of them, who had become a friend of mine separately, he wasn't in my classes, John Buckholz. When they walked away, John said to me, "How'd you do that?" I said, "How I do what?" He said, "The Hell's Angel," and he was one. He said, "You're talking to a gang of Hell's Angels, and they love you. How did you do that?" I said, "Well, one, I did them a favor. I taught them how to write well enough to answer letters and write back home and so on, which many of them didn't have. And two, I treated them with respect. And I hadn't coined the term sales infiltration yet, but that's what I was describing. I sort of got in with them. He said, the only thing you're missing is a jacket. I'm surprised they haven't given you a jacket." A funny little aside, we were, again, that same group, we're standing in the yard, and out on the highway goes by a motorcycle or two or whatever. I wasn't tuned. I knew it was a motorcycle, but I wasn't tuned into the fact that Harley Davidsons have a particular sound. It's so distinctive. It's trademarked. If you deliberately build a motorcycle for sale and it sounds like a Harley Davidson, you'll be sued as soon as they find out about it, because the unique sound of a Harley Davidson motorcycle is literally trademarked. And so anyway, this motorcycle goes by and all the heads turn towards the highway. They wish they were with them. They wish they had their motorbike and were riding with them and so on. And when they turned back, I said, I don't think I've ever mentioned it, but I've had a couple of motorcycles. And they said, "Really? What kind?" I said, "Well, I had a Yamaha 125 and a Honda 550. And they sort of just turned and drifted away. Nobody said anything bad, but I knew I had lost them. And John Buckholz said, "If you mention that blanking Honda 550 again, I will kill you." Apparently, that wasn't the way to get in tight with the Hells Angels. But sales infiltration, I met John Buckholz was the head of the Hells Angels' best friend. And he said later in life, almost before he died, as he was dying, that his favorite motorcycle was a Honda Goldwing, that it was better than anything Harley Davidson ever made. And when word got out, that was his feeling. Many of the Hells Angels sent out word. Sonny Barger may have said that, but we don't ever repeat it. So today, to regular people, I reluctantly, if I get near the subject of motorcycles, I don't discuss my Honda 550. It turned a dozen Hells Angels temporarily against me.
Well,
But
they're Hell's Angels, Ben. I mean, come on. You had to have known. I think you misspoke without thinking. I'm going to give you some grace here.
I was just running through the inventory of the two motorcycles I had. I thought I was being informative.
I had a neighbor that lived across the street that would walk his dog with his Harley. He'd fire that thing up and I would just shiver. It's like, oh God, because it is a sound. It's a very distinctive sound. And I'd go outside and watch him because he would just ease his way down the road and take this very fat, gorgeous chocolate lab for a walk. And
Uh,
I laughed my fanny off every time he did it. I don't think that's what it was meant for. I really
no, I
don't.
don't think so either.
No.
But they
But yeah,
really were a neat group of people. But uh, by that time, middle-aged millionaire in prison, that's not the group I was supposed to gravitate toward. Well, a sales infiltrator doesn't care about that. I was later today, tomorrow, next time we're talking, or this time if we get to it, my life was saved by the Mexican mafia in San Quentin. And many of my friends, part of it being because there's a higher percentage of them, but many of my best friends to this day are Black, many of them with a interesting background. One of them, Gigi and I adopted, Lamont Bowens, went through the experience. It was positive, and wrote a book, Don't Let Your Past Hold You Back, The Redemption of a Gangster. Well, Lamont is as dark as anybody you've ever seen, but he's our son. He's one of the boys we talk about when we talk about our five boys. And that was sales infiltration. He came to a class I was teaching at Lompoc, public speaking and sales and marketing. Again, I hadn't coined the term sales infiltration yet, but he came to that. He was a 19-year-old drug dealer doing 5 years for that lifestyle. He'd been in a gun battle or shots fired, gun battle may be a little dramatic, with his stepfather. He and I were not a natural match, to say the least. But he came up to me and said, Mr. Gay, is there any chance of me getting in there? And I said, yeah. Walked him through the side door into the cafeteria room that we used for that particular class. And he said, no, I don't have to talk, do I? I said, no, of course not. It's a public speaking class. I wonder why that thought would cross his mind. Uh, and I said,
the minute you said no, I just started laughing because I know what that particular tone from you means. So
well,
should have
yeah,
been warned.
why would you ask that? So I said, we walked in the group, and of course, everybody turned around because the instructor had arrived. And I said, lady and gentlemen, there was a lady there who ran the place named Annie Wilson, and she happened to be there that night, finishing up something, I guess. I said, lady and gentlemen, we're joined tonight by Lamont Bowens. You all know him. And he's going to be the newest member of the class. And he's going to speak to you now for just a few minutes. Lamont? And I had my hand on his shoulder. I could feel the muscles tense. He only did, I'm guessing, 2 or 3 minutes, but it was as powerful as anything Martin Luther King Jr. ever did for those 2 or 3 minutes. He didn't have a lot of inventory. And I thought, this kid's got something. So I took him under my wing, helped get him his GED. He was a high school dropout, assuming he ever dropped in. Helped get him his GED. When he got out, he contacted me, and he said, I think that was about when he started calling me dad, and GD was mom. He said, I've decided to go to college. And I said, fantastic. Uh, you know, What can I do? He said, well, funny you should ask that. I don't want you to lend me or give me a dime, but I would like for you to guarantee my loan. If you do that, I'm in. I've already been accepted. Money is the only issue, and I promise you, you will never have to pay a dime. It will never be brought up again. So I said, fine. And Gigi and I signed off on the stuff he sent us, and off he went to college. Took him 4 or 5 years to get through. Again, he didn't have a real history of going to classes and studying and so on, but he graduated from college. And shortly thereafter, a year or so later, he called and he said, Dad, I got something to ask you. And I said, how much is this going to cost me? And he
That's a
said,
typical parent reaction, by the way.
yeah. He said, like last time, nothing. I've decided to be an attorney and I just need the loan for law school guaranteed. I said, send it to me. Today, Lamont is a successful attorney in Washington, D.C., with offices in a couple other places in the big firm he's with. He's got a book out, doing well.
I have that book.
There you go. And it's just an amazing life turn because I was a sales infiltrator and was able to infiltrate a young Black gang member, as I did at San Quentin with the Mexican mafia, as I've done almost everywhere I've ever gone. And most of the people, or many of the people would be a better thing, are minorities, Mexicans, Blacks, whatever, people who didn't have as good a shot at life as some of us did in the beginning and had to turn their lives around. But it wasn't done by lecturing them and you got to do this and you're wrong and so on. It was by getting in, by becoming we to them, whether it was a group or an individual or whatever. And off we went.
But
So I,
Ben, so much, and what I've listened to you talk about this before. We have talked about this on the podcast and just personal conversations that we have. But what you are terming sales infiltration, to me, honestly, is more of a personality. It's who you
right.
are. It's ingrained in you. You're going to listen. You're going to try to help. You're not going to judge or, get in and say, I can promise you this. And like that commercial I always tell you about when this guy is standing out and flinging his arms around, tires ain't pretty, but you got to have them. It's the best commercial I've ever seen. But you're not trying to coerce anybody into anything. You're actually there to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's the personality.
And that's the reason I said it's a life. Sales infiltration is not a
Exactly.
technique.
Right,
It's
right.
a lifestyle with every person you meet, every time you meet them. When I approach somebody, whether it's somebody I know, and I always gravitate towards restaurants because I've spent entertaining people over the years, and Gigi and I enjoy it. And it's easy to understand. When I enter a restaurant, first of all, Gigi says to me, leave the customers alone. And I said, no, I'll do my best, but I intend to leave any situation with 2, 3, 10 casual new friends. And so I begin commenting on, what a handsome child you have or whatever. But let's start with the waitress or the hostess or the server, I guess they're called now, at the door. My first reaction, trained, is what can I compliment about this person right now? I don't care if I've met them 100 times or first time. What can I compliment, give a sincere compliment about? If the person, man or woman, is 100 pounds overweight and wasn't particularly good looking to start with, I'm not going to lie to them. They know it's a lie and say, oh, how handsome you are, how beautiful you are. But everybody has something you can compliment: their hairstyle, the bow in their hair, their shoes, the dress, the color of the dress, the way they have put themselves together. I say frequently, I've been in and around the cosmetic business for almost 50 years. I wish I had known you when I was in that business because you have a beautiful, a perfect face for makeup. And there are faces, triangle or square, oval, etc. And as Ern Westmore, the great Hollywood makeup artist, taught me years ago, to the arch of a brow and the bow of a lip, there's not a woman in the world who cannot be made more beautiful. So I think of Ern and I look for that in there somewhere. There's something I can compliment and make them feel good about themselves. And now with Maddie having told Gigi that he looks at himself 4 or 5 times a day over something she said casually 20, 25 years ago, I'm even, if it's possible, I'm even more revved up about finding something that I can sincerely talk to about them. So anyway, that's a footnote or a baseline for sales infiltration. And if those of you listening have any questions, email them to Denise or me, and we will build them into a future session and answer them for you. Now, I left Holiday Magic Cosmetics many years ago. I like to say I left because after all these years, it still stings. I got fired, exiled to Canada to run the company up there, and then fired by the guy who was supposedly my mentor and best friend, William Penn Patrick. Won't go into the details, but it cost me $14 million and ultimately my job when I wouldn't go along with what he wanted to do next. So I'm now a free man in San Rafael, California, and Tiburon. We had 2 places there. In Marin County, California, one of the wealthiest places in the country. And I'm the former president of one of the largest private employers in the area. And I was well known in the restaurants, but I quickly discovered I wasn't well known to anybody else because we were an international company. When I left, we were taking in $1 million a day, adjusted for inflation. That's 3.5 billion with a B a year. And yet we had almost no local distributors. The last thing I wanted was every time I walk out the door, bump into somebody telling me that they don't like the shade of the cherry red lipstick or something. So we not only didn't recruit locally, we sort of discouraged it. Therefore, there were people in Marin County, I'm the largest private employer, one of the largest private employers there, who had no idea what was going on in that building. I had no idea, all they saw was Cadillacs and Lincolns and Corvettes outside and no foot traffic except for employees coming and going. And so they didn't know who I was. And, I'm sort of like, I'm Ben Gay, president of this, was president of this company. Here I am, world. And the world locally didn't know or care unless you were a waitress at a upscale restaurant in Tiburon. So I discovered I had to reestablish or establish myself in that community just to get a toehold and start off. Here's where sales infiltration came in as I began building the life I have today and undoing the life I had had. I thought, how do you get to know the local people? I'm not going to go door to door. Hi, I'm Ben Gay and I need a friend. How do you get to meet the local people? So I asked around, and somebody told me about the marvelous Marin Breakfast Club. Business leaders, you had to own your business or be the president of a large company or something to get in it. And I said, great, I'll join that, and that'll get me in with 100 people. I later heard there was 100 limited of 100 members and a waiting list. So here's a group I suddenly wanted to meet, get to know, and have them get to know me. And there's a waiting list, and they were dead serious about it. So I said, to somebody, I said, who's the head of it? Well, it was a guy named Margosian, who was a big deal. He personally didn't have a big successful business, but he was one of those movers and shakers. Every community has one. somebody who knows everybody and makes things happen and so on. That was Margot Magosian. So I called him and told him I was interested in joining the Breakfast Club. And he says, all right, I'll put you on the list. And I said, how long is the list? And he says, I don't know the exact number, but we haven't had any new members in the last 4 or 5 years. So probably that would be a good indicator. I said, I've given talks on sales and motivation and marketing all over the world. That's an exaggeration, but all over much of the world. And uh, what if I offered to give you and your club a free speech/seminar, free, no cost, where I come in and explain sales marketing and sort of remove the veil from this company that all of you have heard of, but none of you have known anybody within it, Holiday Magic Cosmetics. He said, would you do that? I said, yeah. That's sales infiltration, listeners, right there. That was the first crack in the dike. Sales infiltration got me to Margot Margosian, and Margot got me up in front of 100 of the most, if we're talking about business, 100 of the most important business people in a county that was still is among the richest counties in the United States of America, probably in the world. So, and now I've got an invitation to stand in front of 100 of them, introduce myself, give them something of value, not try and sell them anything, just introduce myself, sales infiltration. I did it, got a standing ovation, an invitation to come back on the spot. Would you come back and do it again? And then I said to Margot, well, I'm not a member. He said, don't worry about that. You know, became a secret member of this cult that they had called the Marvelous Marin Breakfast Club. That's all sales infiltration. It introduced me to the president of the bank. I was already doing business with it, but I had no contact. I didn't need a loan or anything. But the president of the Bank of Marin, Bill Murray, came up and introduced himself. He was chasing me around, not the other way around. He was at dinner with my family probably a week after that, and I was in with where the money was or where the money was kept rather quickly by giving away a 60-minute talk and then later another 60-minute talk for free. That's sales infiltration. And I was in with a whole bunch of them. Now, I still didn't have a seminar business doing what I had been doing for several years. On my own, I didn't have a seminar business. I wanted to establish that. So I started looking around, trying to find a place to get my toehold there. And I'm sitting in my house in Marin County, right on San Francisco Bay, looking across one of the inlets to the San Rafael Canal. And sticking up from behind a hill, I see a smokestack. It's brick, but, a smokestack, steam or something was coming out of the top of it. And I thought, I wonder what that is. It was right at the base of the San Rafael Richmond Bridge. And after a little bit of thinking, it dawned on me that was part of San Quentin. You couldn't see the prison from my house, but you could see the top half of their smokestack. So that gave me an idea. I'm really good in front of groups, getting people to turn around, change their goals, and so on. I thought San Quentin might be a real challenge. So I gave it a little thought, came up with the term people builders, because that's really what I've been doing for years, building people if they want to be built. And so I came up with that term, and I thought I will sell a series of seminars to San Quentin, which will give me credibility, additional credibility with outside people. He's the guy that walked into San Quentin, and I'm sort of getting ahead of the story, but that's what happened. He's the guy that walked into San Quentin, looked death in the eye, spent time with Charlie Manson locked up in his cell with him, and so on. So, question comes up, who do you talk to? Well, obviously, you'd probably talk to the warden, or the warden would guide you to the right person. So, not knowing who that might be, I called Margot Magosian. I said, Margot, I'm thinking about doing something at San Quentin. Do you know anybody over there? He said, yeah, and so do you. You met him. The warden, Red Nelson, is a member of the Marvelous Marin Breakfast Club. He heard you the other day and has talked about you several times since. Sales, infiltration, folks. So, I don't know, within a few days, I'm sitting in Red Nelson's office just outside the wall or adjacent to the wall. It's California's infamous San Quentin State Prison, where death row still is, although they're not actively doing anything with it now. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I relate to him? He doesn't know who I am. Well, he's seen me speak, so that ought to help. And then it dawned on me that my first wife used to talk about her uncle was Clinton Duffy. He was the most famous warden probably in the United States, but certainly at San Quentin in the California prison system. I never met him. I think he was dead before I ever heard his name. I'm not sure she heard it, but I had the right to say an uncle-in-law of mine is Clinton Duffy. And I said that to Red Nelson, and any resistance he had was down. He'd seen me speak, thanks to Margot Magosian, thanks to Sales Infiltration, and now I'm distantly related to Clinton Duffy, a legend in the penal system. Come on over. So I go over, drove around the tip of the bay there, and walked into San Quentin for the first time of what would become hundreds of times. I taught there officially once a week for 12 hours. We get a 12-hour encounter seminar from 6 o'clock Friday evening to 6 o'clock Saturday morning. And, once a week without fail for 5 years. Plus, that got me involved with other things in San Quentin. So I was in and out of there on a regular basis. To point, Officer Evans and I became close friends. Officer Evans was the guy at the East Gate who decided whether you got in or not. Well, I always got in. I had the blessings of the warden, Sales Infiltration. I warmed him up. And a little thing about Officer Evans. The reason he was out at the East Gate and not inside the prison with the inmates, several years before, an inmate had walked up to him with a shank and slit his throat ear to ear. And you could still see the scar. It was quite prominent when you looked at him. That's what you saw. And an inmate named Crazy Horse Taylor picked him up. The rule is, if an officer's in trouble, you don't help. They're the enemy. Crazy Horse Taylor scooped him up, wrapped something around his neck to cut back on the bleeding, and ran with him across the prison yard to the hospital or infirmary, and it saved Officer Evans' life. And and Crazy Horse Taylor became a friend of mine inside the prison. So again, Sales Infiltration. The People Builders program we established there, hundreds of people went through it, maybe thousands. I didn't count that way, not thinking I'd be talking about it all these years later, but thousands of people went through. Here's what's really interesting about it, though. When I got to San Quentin, the recidivism rate was 65%. That meant that 65% of all the people who went into San Quentin and the penal system in California in general, 65% who went in, did their time, and got out were back within 2 years. The graduates of People Builders, we had a 12-week course, although most people, once they got in it, just stayed. They graduated every 12 weeks, but they stayed till they got turned loose. The recidivism rate among those people was not 65%, it was 5%. Because using Sales Infiltration, we taught them there was a better way, that they didn't have to live like that people with less talent and less skill than they had were already living a better life, but they didn't know the rules, how to do it. So we taught them the rules in People Builders. Now, what did it do for me? One, it established a seminar business. It made me newsworthy. We had international, national, international, and local articles published, TV crews showing up to see what was going on there and what made a difference. Well, among the things I was teaching, although it didn't have a name yet, was sales infiltration. And speaking, almost everything I've ever taught about getting better in life involves public speaking. It's the great breakthrough in self-confidence and so on. Remove my ability to speak in public back in the beginning, and I got better as time went on. And the people who helped me, Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino, and all those nice people who worked for me, but they were better speakers than I was. They helped me rise up through the ranks, so to speak. And it was all due to a thing I didn't know yet, sales infiltration, and the ability to speak in public. Side note, I walk into a room one day. I'm out in California from Atlanta for, I think it was a 30-day training class. We're back in the offices practicing scripts and so on, and I forgot my manual. So I excused myself to Bill Dempsey, who happened to be my first sponsor in Holiday Magic back in Atlanta, and I excused myself, and I said, I'm going to go get my manual. I left it in the training room. So I go up to the training room, walk in the back door, which was cracked, so I didn't have to open it or rattle it or anything, and I walked in, and there was William Penpatrick, the owner of the company, one of my first mentors past my father, and Fred Pate, the president of the company at the time, and they're looking at a television monitor. And on that monitor, I hear my voice. They're looking at tapes that we had done earlier that day. Everybody out for training, Zig, Bill Dempsey, all of them, did a demo tape, for lack of a better word, as did I. They're staring intently at me, and they don't know I'm in the room. And William Penpatrick, Bill Patrick, said to Fred Pate, he's good. He said, I will pay more for the ability to effectively communicate than any other skill. So I did the moonwalk back out of the office, didn't get my manual. I got that later, and went back and said, the meeting room's tied to Bill Dempsey. The meeting room's tied up, but let's study out of yours. And I went to work. I went from a casual guy with a pretty good personality to a serious student of effective communications. And less than 2 years later, I was president of the company, and those people I just mentioned all worked for me. Everybody that was anybody in the sales, marketing, motivation business wanted to be with Holiday Magic. They wanted to get up on our stages because we had a few hundred, just in the United States, a few hundred meetings a night with 400 or 500 people, and most of them trying to figure out how to get in the business. And in every one of those, we needed somebody at the front of the room to say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my name is fill in the blank. I'm a general distributor with whichever company they were with. We had 5 of them, and begin communicating. That was the turning point, one of many, the turning point in me getting serious about those skills that would serve me well for years to come, up until and including today. And that didn't have a name. That was sales infiltration. And the Red Nelson San Quentin story was a big part of that, because it got huge recognition for what we were doing there and the sheer fascination. When I talk to somebody and they know a little bit or have heard a little bit about me, they want to know about the prison experience. They want to know about what was it like to meet with Charlie Manson, which I did in his cell for 9 hours, 3 different visits, a total of 9 hours. And they wanted to know what it was like to work with the astronauts, because I was the attitude coach for Apollo 15, 16, 17. I've shaken the hands of every man who ever walked on the moon, 12 of them. And I probably know another 80, 90, or 100 people who reach flight status as an astronaut. That's who they want to know about. Charlie Manson, the astronauts, and what was it like in prison. And so I built a career around it. And then at San Quentin, I figured out another business advantage, which was I was now starting to build a consulting business. Uh, who who might want to go into San Quentin? And I discovered everybody. Some were scared to death, but they all wanted to go in. So I called Red Nelson and I said, Red, now we're Red. We're not Warden and Mr. Gay. We're Red and Ben. I said, Red, I've got some people who are fascinated by what we're doing here. I'd like to bring one or two in, maybe a week or whatever, just sit in the class. He said, if you vouch for them, they're in. So he sent word out. Ben Gay walks up to the gate with somebody, and he says he's okay. We'll let him in. And we sort of bring people in. My closing rate among people who were prospective clients, either already clients or prospective clients, was 100%. If you came with me to San Quentin and sat in the room for 12 hours with a couple of hundred inmates that you would instinctively fear and see what we could do, we and they could do together, you were in. I got numerous companies that you would know the names of to hire me, work with me, consult with me, etc., all because of San Quentin. San Quentin was thanks to Red Nelson. Red Nelson was thanks to Margot Magosian and the Marvelous Marin Breakfast Club, and all of them come under the heading of sales infiltration. Here's how you start to spread the word. The first time I met with Red, well, I tried to sell him People Builders as a program. I intended to make money off of it. And I forget the figure, but let's say it was $20,000 a year, which in today's money would be $200,000 a year. And so I gave him the presentation. It didn't have anything in writing because I'd sort of made it up on the driving over to the prison. And I had the term People Builders in my mind probably 48 hours before that. So I go over and make the presentation. He says, I like it. And again, because of sales infiltration, he had seen me at work at the Breakfast Club. He said, I like it. I'm going to push it through. We're going to do it. I said, all right. What kind of schedules, how long does it take to push it through? Oh, and he buzzed his secretary who came in with a stack of papers, 6 or 8 inches tall. He said, just get these filled out so we can get into the system. And I sort of recoiled. Salespeople don't do paperwork very well, especially 6 or 8 inches of it. I said, well, how long is it going to take? He said, Ben, I'm behind this. I'm going to push it through. I'll have it done in, I don't know, less than 2 years. I said, 2 years? He said, yeah, well, it's a substantial amount of money and it's a new concept for him, but I promise you we'll get it done. I said, what if we do it for free? He said, free? We can start this afternoon. That afternoon, an hour or two after that conversation, he picked up the microphone and they had him behind his desk and made an announcement to the entire prison. If you have freedom of movement or whatever they called it and can get to it, come to the Jewish chapel at 1:00 or whatever time, and we'll introduce you to a new concept that we're approving here at the prison. And about an hour later, I walk into a room with 200 inmates who were willing to give, they turned out, I had to hear the details, they were willing to give up Friday night, their best meal of the week, sit in a room for 12 hours, no breaks of any kind. There was a bathroom inside the room, so they could use that, and eat K rations. We got cans of K rations. If you're hungry, there it is. Have all you want. And they gave up their Friday night and a good night's sleep all the way to Saturday morning for free to better themselves. And at that point, let me back up just a little bit and say our recidivism rate in People Builders was after we'd been there for 2 years and had figures to compare, was a little under 5%. Theirs had been 65%. Here's where we cheated a bit. When you get a person who will give up the only good meal of the week and spend 12 hours being yelled at by a young white guy, and perhaps 67% of the room was not white at any given time. Probably you're a little more serious about bettering yourself and getting out than the average person. So that attributed to part of the 65% down to 5%. I will readily admit we got the cream of the crop, but the cream of the crop came out of 3,200 hardened inmates who had done something bad enough to get to San Quentin, which was one of the worst places in the prison system anywhere in the country. You might be a criminal, but you try to commit crimes that wouldn't get you to San Quentin. That was not the place you wanted to go.
No,
So,
anybody who listened to Johnny Cash knew that.
yeah, yeah, that was Folsom Prison, but
Was it
yeah,
false? The same thing.
yeah, it really is just right up the road, and they
I
offered
know.
me to do People Builders there. A warden named Jack, somebody, asked me to come in and do it, and I said, I have a life to lead and a business to run.
I
I,
can't
I,
do it.
I can't do it.
No.
Want to, but I can't. So anyway, that's how we got 200, the first 200 inmates in the room. It all goes back to sales infiltration, without exception. And when I got in front of the room, I mentioned this word when we started earlier today. The first thing I said to them, I don't know the whole sentence, but it started with we.
Mhm.
Gentlemen, we
Right.
are going to do this. We're going to do this, and so on. And I began infiltrating them. I wasn't the guy that comes in from outside and criticizes and tells them everything that is wrong. No, we are going to do whatever. And I began forming that bond, which later literally saved my life in that same room. A year or two later, when a guy was sent into the room to kill me as an initiation for getting into the Mexican prison gang, the Mexican mafia. Here's a little thing, and then we'll get to that perhaps the next time.
Yeah,
Here,
and I have to say we are running out of time because I know you've got to get somewhere else.
yeah,
So let's
yep,
finish that up, and then next week, let's turn the tables, and we'll talk about Lompoc. You weren't teaching from the outside, you were actually an inmate, and I know the story, but I think our audience wants to know it too. And you walked into Lompoc with nothing and eventually became, as you describe it, the most successful inmate there. So I can't wait for that conversation.
and that uses the same techniques we're starting to talk about now.
Mhm.
So I will make a mark, and the next thing I will discuss with you is how I used Red Nelson as a prop to sell the whole prison on the fact that I had infiltrated the organization.
Got it. Well, and I know you have to run. I've been watching the clock very carefully. So listen, everybody, be sure to get the closers books, parts 1 and part 2. Go to Ronzoni Books. I've already mentioned that. And stay with us because we're going to be talking about sales infiltration in really 2 different places that you would never think to find it or understand it or go, huh, that's interesting. So join us next week. And Ben, I'll see you Wednesday.
Super. Look forward to it.
Me too. I'm fascinated with these stories. I know them, but every time I hear them, I'm like, oh, that's different. How did I miss that part? So thank you, everybody. Join us again next Wednesday on the Closers Inner Circle podcast. And as Ben mentioned, if you have any questions, get in touch with us. It's easy to find us. The best place, honestly, is go to LinkedIn, just type in our names, and you can send us messages right there. Thank you, and we will see you next week.